Hey guys, it's Chelsea from The Financial Diet, and this week's video is brought to you by CuriosityStream. And this week, I wanted to talk to you about something that frankly deeply pisses me off. And that is pervasive, shame-driven myths about millennials, referred to by one Ipsos MORI study as the most derided generation. Millennials are basically an easy punching bag for the media and older generations. It's easy to put the shortcomings of bigger systemic failures on our backs than to look at the bigger reasons why a lot of these trends are happening. Millennials happen to come of age at a time where a lot of other bad things were happening. Things like the Great Recession, the student debt bubble, slashed employment benefits, etc. Things that made for a much harsher and scarier world, and which can make our generation's decisions on the surface look like they're motivated by laziness or narcissism when they're usually just motivated by limited choices. And for most of us, it's hard not to feel resentful of all this blaming and shaming. So this video is not just meant to make us all feel a little bit less crazy, but to serve as a shorthand if you ever need to correct someone when they spout off one of these completely toxic millennial myths. Number 1, we are synonymous with kids. First, let's just get this out of the way. People talk about millennials like we're children or overgrown teenagers, but we are quite literally adults. In fact, millennials are as old as 38 now, so the framing of us as if we're all still petulant teenagers is pretty ridiculous. But it starts to make sense when you realize just who is creating a lot of these media narratives and who the traditional media is speaking to. Here's a fun fact. According to Nielsen, the median age for CNN viewers is 60 years old, and for Fox News and MSNBC, they're tied at 65 years old. So when you consider who is actually watching these stories about how millennials are destroying the world, that they're mostly people our parents' and grandparents' ages, it makes a lot more sense that we're basically framed as America's children, because that's how these demographics see us and relate to us. But it's important that we understand that that framing is just biased and stupid. We're adults. Number 2 is we are lazy. This is probably the most pervasive and damaging myth about millennials, in that it impacts so many people's perceptions about us, that we don't work hard, that we want everything handed to us, etc. But a 2016 study by the Manpower Group found that 73% of millennials work 40 hours a week or more, and that the average millennial work week is 45 hours. But there are two very real things that feed into this perception of us. One, millennials are generally much better at using technology to their advantage to streamline or automate some of their work or to help ease some of the tedious, repetitive elements of it, which comes as no surprise when you consider that we grew up with much of this technology. I think we've all met the highly paid corner office executive who can't figure out how to convert something to PDF. But 2, they don't tend to judge their value by the raw amount of time they are physically present at their desk, often because they're already so used to using the internet to facilitate much of their work and communication. But working differently, and in some cases more intelligently and more adaptively, does not mean we are lazy. And this perception that millennials are lazy is further contradicted by how competitive we are when it comes to work, especially compared to our peers. CEB, a consulting firm, polls 90,000 Americans each quarter, and it finds that the millennials among them are in fact the most competitive. 59% of them in the latest poll said competition is what gets them up in the morning, compared with just 50% of baby boomers, and some 58% of millennials said they compare their performance with their peers as against 48% for other generations. Long story short, millennials aren't lazy. We just have a different definition of what it means to work intelligently. Number 3, we can't buy homes because we drink too much coffee. If I never have to hear from another financial expert who grew up in an era where everything from higher education to home buying to secure retirement was vastly more accessible to the average American, Susie Orman and Dave Ramsey, it will be too soon. The tired stereotypes about how much millennials love fancy breakfast foods are just a very convenient way to obscure all of the real systemic reasons why so many of these big traditional adult milestones, like home ownership, are not so accessible to us. First of all, the average millennial student debt balance is around $40,000, which is hard enough on your day-to-day financial decisions, let alone longer-term financial planning like buying a home. But combined with that huge debt burden that previous generations didn't have to deal with, at least not anywhere near the same rates as we do, with the fact that millennials are underemployed. For recent college graduates, aged 22 to 27, the underemployment numbers have been rising steadily, with the underemployment rate rising to 44% in 2012, Compared to the unemployment rate, which fluctuated anywhere from between 4 and 10% during the same time period, these numbers are alarmingly high. Employers are also offering less and less stability, with the past 20 years, and especially since the Great Recession, seeing a rise in things like temp workers, contracted workers, so-called permalancers, the gig economy, etc., along with decreases in benefits offered for these same positions. It's no surprise why an employer would rather keep you an illegal full-time contractor. They don't have to offer you anything in return for that, such as healthcare. They also don't have to pay employment tax on you. So combine underemployment with crushing debt and rising home costs in these densely populated urban areas where millennials tend to live, and you get a very obvious formula why millennials aren't buying homes, which has nothing to do with how much we love fucking cold brew. Number 4, we are destroying insert industry here. So I don't know if you've read the news lately, but millennials are on a bit of a killing spree. Everything from diamonds to the suburbs to SUVs to breakfast cereals have been in our warpath of industries we are mercilessly choking out of life. So let's break this down, because generally speaking, when you hear a story about how millennials are killing X or Y industry or product, there are 2 possible underlying issues. Either these are things that are really bad for the environment / society / our mental or physical health, and they absolutely should be destroyed. Things like water guzzling lawns, huge unnecessary McMansions, isolating suburbs, enormous SUVs for 3-person homes. In fact, we did a whole video on how the suburban lifestyle is not only terrible for the environment, it's terrible for your brain. We'll link you to that in the description. Or if the industry in question / product in question was not actively harmful to its consumers or the world at large, it's usually something that's just simply too expensive. And the reason for millennials opting out is pretty similar to why they're opting out of buying starter homes. It's a question of available funds. Things like big fancy diamonds, although that could also probably go under the bad for the world and should be going away anyway category, or the golf industry, or the motorcycle industry. Basically frivolous luxuries that most millennials can't afford. The broader point though is that it's not for an industry to point their finger and cry and be like, consumers, why aren't you buying my product anymore? This is your fault. I'm really mad at you. Buy these conflict diamonds. It's up to the industry to provide a better product which adapts to the needs and desires of changing generations, which is always going to happen. All that said, here at TFD, we are actually dedicated to killing the bullshit I'm going to make you rich quick financial advice industry, because that needs to die. Number 5, we only care about ourselves. There's a really pervasive myth, whether about commitment to a long-term partner or even just to an employer, that millennials are simply not very loyal. And it's pretty hard to shake because there's some evidence on the surface that these myths are true, but when you dig a little deeper, you realize that the answer is much more complicated. For example, millennials generally are getting married later, which might make sense for someone to superficially then say, oh, they're just afraid of commitment. But getting married at these later ages actually makes us less likely to divorce, rates of which have been steadily decreasing over the past 10 years. So while we do take our time and are sometimes delayed in being able to pay for things like a wedding because of some of these reasons I described earlier, we're actually ending up more loyal to the person that we're ending up with. And when it comes to employers, while some of us may be caught up in contracted or temp work cycles that make it hard to build a career on the longer term, at a national level, our average duration with employers is pretty on par with previous generations. The average job tenure for someone in the 1980s is actually almost exactly the same as it is today. In 1983, it was about 3 years per employer. Now it's 2.8. But speaking of work, number 6 is we all want to be entrepreneurs / self-employed. There's this myth that our whole generation wants to be these hard-hustling, self-employed, entrepreneurial people. And while it is true that we're doing these things at higher rates than previous generations, what is often overlooked is how much we're having to do this out of necessity / adaptation versus actual desire. In fact, most millennials actually look at creating their own job as a better path to long-term security than keeping a traditional job. 61% of millennials expressed belief that they could find more job security by owning their own business as opposed to working for someone else. On the contrary, 64% of baby boomers felt working for someone else provided greater job security. There is a big difference between pursuing something because it is your true passion and doing it because you're so wary of the long-term stability that your career could provide. What most millennials want is what most human beings want: a fair wage, a financially secure future, a reasonable work-life balance, and being treated with dignity in the workplace. Unfortunately, for many of us, it feels that self-employment is probably the most sure way to get those things. Number 7, we want a trophy for everything. So the trophy thing kills me. Because let's say it even is true that we are super affected as adults because the whole participation trophy phenomenon flourished while we were kids. If that were even true, wouldn't that say more about our parents who actually implemented all of this than it inherently does about us? But more importantly, I can assure you that no millennial wants a trophy more than they want the things that I listed in that previous point, like a fair wage and work-life balance. Most of us have experienced jobs where our employers thought that a ping pong table in the break room or frequent employee retreats where you got things like yes participation trophies was a viable substitute for things like health insurance or retirement. And the answer is no. No millennial gives a shit about a trophy. We just want to be treated like the full-grown, hard-working adults we are. Give us what we deserve, and you won't have to worry about also coming up with a cute little certificate covered in glitter. And if you want to learn more about the world around you, no matter what generation, you should check out CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream is a subscription streaming service founded by the creator of the Discovery Channel, and made for those of you with no shame in your nerd game, with over 2,400 documentary and nonfiction titles from some of the world's best filmmakers, including exclusive originals like The Birth of the Internet, The Grammar of Happiness, or Conscious Capitalism. Get unlimited access starting at just $2.99 a month, and for TFT viewers, the first 31 days are completely free if you sign up at curiositystream.com/thefinancialdiet or use the promo code TheFinancialDiet. As always, guys, thank you for watching, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and to come back every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday for new and awesome videos. Bye!